This coming few weeks, we're going to start a new series we're calling Leave a Mark. And so you'll see this next kind of like little logo here over the next few weeks. When Liz was speaking last week on Mother's Day, as she was going through her talk, she was talking about the need for mothers and fathers, not just parents, but for spiritual mothers and fathers, to care for and to think about the next generation. For us to have people like that all across the church who are thinking about those who are coming after us. I was realizing that when she was halfway through her message that like that week should have been part of everything we're doing now. So that's just proof that I'm disorganized if you hadn't caught that already. But really she was talking about the thought of us leaving a mark on the next generation, us mentoring those who are coming after us. And so if I was smart, I would have wrapped all that into what we're doing now, but here we are. One of my favorite movies from when I was younger was Tommy Boy, right? Any older folks remember Tommy Boy? Okay, and just the whole thing of like the boat mast hitting him in the back of the head, and what does he say? Someone knows it. That's gonna leave a mark, right? Thank you. I had to just cue you there a little bit, but you know, that's going to leave a mark. Like we're used to that phrase, that's going to leave a mark. Well, what I want us to think about is how we can leave a mark. A little bit different to that, but how we can leave a mark, how we can make a lasting impact in the places that God has put us. Imagine this. What if we saw our lives, our day-to-day, going to work, eating at restaurants, shopping at Target, weekends up north, side hustle jobs, leadership in the workplace, participation in extracurricular groups, any of the things that we do in our neighborhoods, in our front yards, what if we saw that as an outflow of our calling as Jesus people to live lives of impact, to leave a mark of God's presence wherever we go? And I like what Liz was saying last week was moving that from kind of like general ideas to something absolutely specific about leaving a mark on the next generation. One little phrase that she said that you may have caught or probably forgotten by now, but she said this. She said, if you're available to everyone, you sort of end up becoming available to no one. And so what's very easy in when you come and listen to a talk at church is for it to be so general that it doesn't do anything specific. Okay, what I liked about what she did was that she was challenging you all and us to think specifically about individual people that we might be somewhat responsible, not just our own children if you have kids, but being a part of this community, that there might be specific kids that we want to leave a mark in their lives. Some of us are involved in a group that we've been doing recently at Anthem called Life Shared, and it meets on a Monday night. And we've been asking this question: who are the people in your lives that you believe God might be asking you to reach out to in some way, to pray for, to leave a mark in their lives, to bring something of God's greatness, something of God's kingdom into those relationships, rather than them just being, oh, this is a neighbor or a coworker or just something that someone that happens to be around me, but to start intentionally praying and thinking about developing those relationships. And I wrote down 3 people in my life that I thought, like, I think the Lord might be asking me to take deeper steps, sometimes uncomfortable steps, in my relationship with them for the benefit of His kingdom. Now, in about 2011, this is something I read in a book a couple of years ago. About 2011, 2 leaders of churches by the names of Jay Pathak and Dave Runyon, they were pastors in a suburb of Denver, Colorado. And they went to see their mayor along with a group of 7 or 8 other pastors. There's about 10 or a dozen pastors from the city of Arvada, Colorado. And they said, as local churches, how can we serve this community? How can we do something for the betterment of our city? And so the mayor said to them, after batting through some ideas, he said, what would be really great is if the churches could start somewhat of a neighboring movement. And this, created sort of like mixed reactions from them. But he expanded because there'd been some recent research that had given them this data that people who have close bonds with the people immediately surrounding them in their neighborhoods live longer than those who don't. This is actual data. Don't know where from, but it's actual data. You know, this is research that's said that people in neighborhoods where people know the names of the people around them, crime is 60% less than in neighborhoods where they don't. And of course, you know, this is somewhat obvious that whenever there's a natural disaster, something takes place that leaves everybody stranded or everybody in a struggle. Who are the first people that you want to be able to reach out to, or the first people that you want to have reach out to you? It's your neighbors. It's those who are like right close to you, right in our neighborhood. And Jesus says that this sort of stuff is important. It's part of that great commandment that we've been called to fulfill. And this mayor said a statement to this group of a dozen pastors that kind of rocked them to their core a little bit when he said, you don't think that we can actually tell any difference between where there's Christian neighbors and where there's not Christian neighbors, do you? And it was kind of a gut punch, really, to a group of church leaders who've been asking people over years to love their neighbor as themselves. And when I sat down and I read this book's called The Art of Neighboring, and I started reading it a couple of years ago. I'd been given it to me a couple of years beforehand, didn't touch it, finally picked it up. And we were on the beach at Good Harbor one day in July a couple of years ago, and I opened this book and read the whole thing in a day. And that's not me at all. It's not the way I read. I don't tend to do that, but I just couldn't put this thing down. And the biggest reason was I realized I'm part of the problem. I'm part of the reason why there is a problem in our communities and a problem with neighboring. And I want us to start thinking today about how can we leave a mark right in our neighborhoods? How can we make an impact in the neighborhoods where God has put us? We're going to read some verses from Luke 10. And Luke 10 is a place where Jesus is about to, he's not just going to do it just yet, but he's about to describe the passage that we know as the Good Samaritan. All right? You might not have needed to be in church for very long, or just you kind of grow up around here and you might hear of the Good Samaritan phrase or what that means. Maybe you didn't know it was in the scriptures, but it is. But Jesus is about to explain this Good Samaritan parable. But it starts out like this, Luke 10:25. On one occasion, an expert in the law stood up to test Jesus. Teacher, he asked, what must I do to inherit eternal life? And Jesus puts it back on him. He says, what is written in the law? He replied. How do you read it? He answered, love the Lord your God with all your heart and all your soul and all your strength and all your mind. That's the first part of what we know as the Great Commandment. It's like Jesus summing up the whole commandment into two things. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. And, what's this next part? Love your neighbor as yourself. The second part of it was to love our neighbor as ourselves. It's very, very straightforward, isn't it? And so Jesus says, well, you've answered correctly, Jesus replied. Do this and you will live. I want you to remember this line. But he wanted to justify himself. So he asked Jesus, who is my neighbor? The first thought that this expert in the law, expert in the Jewish law, the first thought he had was, how do I get out of this? You know, like who is, he's asking this big, deep philosophical question at a time when big, deep philosophical questions shouldn't be asked. Who is my neighbor? He wants to ask who his neighbor. He left his house that morning. He walked past his neighbor's house and he's asking Jesus, who is my neighbor? And Jesus, don't you know how weird the people around me are? You know what other great things I do? Surely we can define neighbor in some other way other than that guy whose house is next to mine. It's interesting, isn't it, that he says his first thought is like, in order to justify himself. In other words, in order to get himself out of neighboring, this guy's, he's trying to find a loophole, right? He's trying to find a way out. And honestly, I think we do this all the time. And at least I do. Because I think, well, I was neighboring to that person, you know, who lives a few miles from me, and I was neighboring to that person at church who I really don't care for too much. Not you, some person that is not here today, but you know, I was being really neighborly to that person that I just have interactions with at work. But Jesus makes it real clear. Like, Jesus is asking us to love our neighbors as himself. And he goes on to talk about the Good Samaritan, and he's already assuming, I think, that these Jewish people are already reaching their actual neighbors, and he takes the neighbor point from small to big. He takes it to a graduate level neighboring, AP level neighboring. But when you take care of the needs of somebody, anybody in front of you, you are neighboring, right? Whether they live in your house or the house next door to you or not. But here's what we tend to do. Exactly what Liz was cautioning us about last week. When we take that scripture and we think that everybody is our neighbor, then we're like, okay, I get it, Jesus. We're supposed to be neighboring all the time. When I meet somebody in the street, when I meet somebody at the RMV, and Lord knows we all need grace at the RMV, right? But like when I meet somebody at this office or that location, here's what we tend to do, is think that when everyone is my neighbor, very soon nobody is my neighbor. Where we've got this general sense that, oh yeah, I'm supposed to take the light of Christ to everyone, pretty soon we find ourselves taking the light of Christ to no one. Or what we think is that maybe Jesus was just talking metaphorically. Maybe he was just saying, like, you know, just love your metaphorical neighbor as yourself. And then we take the light of Jesus where we go to our metaphorical neighbors, and we make a metaphorical difference that only metaphorically changes something, and there's no difference in the world whatsoever. But I wonder if we were to go back to first grade on this and to think, what if Jesus was asking me to love my actual neighbor? And already that feels a little bit like he's going specific now. This is going to get uncomfortable. Because for some of you, if you're living the dream, you have a garage door that's connected to your house, and you can press a button from inside your car, or if you're really hip, your phone just does it for you, and you don't even have to press the button anymore. Your garage door opens, you go in, the garage door closes, and you walk from the back entrance of your garage into your house, and those that surrounded you, those that have been placed around you, you never have to see them. And this is where I believe we need to take an intentional step towards fulfilling the great commandment in our own neighborhoods and saying, yes, Jesus, I will love my neighbors as myself, those specific actual neighbors that live near me. Now, the first step of this is learning your neighbors' names, right? Now, it's the easiest thing to, when we first meet somebody, say, oh, hey, Billy, oh, hey, Colin, and then 30 seconds later, right, you haven't really taken notice of who their name is, right? Has anybody ever done that, or is that just me? Oh, you've done it? Okay, all right. So, like, it's really easy. I mean, has anyone ever said, I'm bad with names? Has anyone ever said this phrase, I'm really bad with names? Come on, confess. Yeah? Okay, we got some honest people in the room. I like this quote. This is from Mindy Kaling, and she's not like a theologian. Maybe she is. I don't know. She's not normally known for being a theologian or anything. She's, Kelly Kapoor from The Office, if you don't know who she was. But let's go with that quote, if you've got it. She says this: I don't think it should be socially acceptable for people to say they are bad with names. She's calling you all out right now, okay? No one is bad with names. That's not a real thing. Not knowing people's names isn't a neurological condition. It's a choice. You choose not to make learning people's names a priority. It's like saying, hey, here's a disclaimer about me. I'm rude. All right, hopefully we're laughing and we're like, yep, that's me. Jay Pathak said, one of the writers of the book that I'm getting some of his thoughts from, he said, I'm not a poet, don't write poems. I don't write songs. I'm not an artist in any way, but I do know some things about love. And if you're going to love somebody, you got to know their name, right? It's kind of step one, isn't it? And so I wanted to bring this little bit of a challenge to us today. This is very practical. This isn't going to take any, graduate level anything today. Every single one of us could do this. But when I tell you about it, some of you are immediately going to try and get out of it. You're immediately going to think, I don't think I can do this. And I think we need to think about ourselves in terms of where we live, whether that's an apartment block, or whether that's a condo complex, and maybe there's like 2 other condos around you, or there's only 2 neighbors or something, and then everyone else is above you, and you could hear them maybe, but like you don't know them very well. I want us to think about neighboring in these terms. So we've printed these cards here, and everyone gets to take one of these on the way out, and it says this: who is my neighbor? And right here is you. Okay, you are there. You are here. And we've just put these blocks around here. I know this doesn't look like your neighborhood or anything. If we were going to try and make it look like your neighborhood, everyone in New England would look like different, right? But like, think in terms of the people, the 8 residents that live around you. Okay, for some of you, you live in a transient kind of place. You live maybe a Hanscom, where people changing out. Take 5 of these cards. You know what I mean? If it's going to change every 6 months or so, take as many as you want. But like, for some of you, you've had the same neighbors forever, and maybe you know this guy's name, but there's this guy that lives like 2 doors down, and you've waved to him 1,000 times in the last 12 years, but you couldn't tell him his name if like your life depended on it, right? You could find that out again. You could go up to him and you could say, hey, I'm really bad with names. Or you could just say, hey, we've lived here forever, and I'm such a fool. You told me your name and I can't remember. You just confess. You know what happens when you admit failure? All of a sudden, it breaks down barriers, doesn't it? Or you could go online to anywho.com and you could find it out that way. That is definitely the cheating way, but don't do that. But this is something you could do if you're a parent. You could do this with your kids as well. Because can you imagine how great it would be if you got kids? I'm looking at some middle schoolers right here, right? Can you imagine if you and your kids decide that over the next few weeks or few months, you're going to get to know the names of the people around you, so that not just you, but also your kids can be out in the street. They can be like, hey, Mrs. Jameson, how you doing? And they're like, wow, what polite children Octavia has, you know? So it could be something like that. So imagine the impact, the start, the step one of us just knowing who is around us, knowing the names of the people in our community. And then maybe you could stick this on your fridge door, or if you don't want neighbors to think you're weird when they come in and they're like, wait, what are you doing? You could put it on the inside of a kitchen cabinet somewhere. You could tape one of these on the inside of the kitchen cabinet where you keep your mugs or something. And so that as a family, as individuals, you think, okay, this is Darren and Christina, and they have 2 girls, and he does this for a living, and she does that. And all the things that you would have otherwise forgotten in the time that you interacted with them. You make a commitment to remember. Why? Because you care. And because Jesus asked us to love our neighbors as ourselves. Is this too hard? We could do this, right? You could almost do this if you're living somewhere, I'm just renting this room for 3 months. You might even be able to take a step into this, and by learning the name of one neighbor. Some of you, like I said, you want to get out of this because you're like, well, we live on one street, and this guy never speaks to anybody, and this person has never even looked to me. In fact, nobody on our street speaks to each other. Well, guess what? It's time to start leading rather than following. It's just time to start setting a culture rather than fitting into a culture. Let's just create more culture, shall we? And let's start to take a step into that place of discomfort, where we make a decision to take the next uncomfortable step to learn people's names. And so there could be some progress in this. That the person that you've been calling bro for the last 9 years, you could start calling him James or Tyler I mean, only if that's his name, but you could start calling him by name. And this could create a whole new spring and summer for us. There's a reason why I wanted to talk about this stuff the beginning of May, or middle of May, because outside of yesterday, from now, the weather's going to start getting great, and you have the greatest opportunity, the greatest 3 to 6 month period that you could have in the greater Boston area to love your neighbors as yourself. And if you need a kick in order to do that, let me give you your friendly kick, because now is a great time to do it. Imagine if we all did this. Imagine the sense of community that could be developed if we took steps to love our neighbors as ourselves. So I want to put a challenge out there to learn the to learn the names of those in the 8 houses that are closest to you. And some of you are on our Anthem Church Community Facebook group, and if you're not on that Anthem Church Community Facebook group, you're welcome to search that. We'll let you in. Just go ahead and search Anthem Church Community, and you can join that group if you're into Facebook, and you could celebrate that stuff. You could be like, hey, I just got to know the names of 3 neighbors, and we'll all give you a thumbs up, and we'll all celebrate that. This is one of those things that doesn't get proved to anybody who you're hoping is going to spiritually pat you on the back, because nobody sees whether you do this or not. This is about us and being those who reach out from the place of our homes. I love this verse, Acts 17, verse 26. It's Paul speaking, and it says, "From one man he made all the nations, that they should inhabit the whole earth, and he marked out their appointed times and the appointed times in history and the boundaries of their lands." God did this so that they would seek him and perhaps reach out for him, though he is not far from any of us. Can you imagine that even within the land that you've been given, or whoever, maybe you live with your parents or you live with family, the land that's been allotted to you and where you live, that from that spot, if people want to find God, there'd be some handles in their neighborhood that they can hang on to. Because I believe that God strategically placed you where he is. That maybe you look back and you think, wow, we really believe that the Lord provided this house or this place for us to live. Well, maybe it's not just for your own safety and security. Maybe it's so that you can love that set of neighbors as yourself. Maybe you live in an apartment and you don't think this is for you. You're strategically placed. Maybe there's people down either side or above or below you that God can create a door that's open if you're willing to step into the unknown. Maybe you think, well, I'm surrounded by Christians. It doesn't matter. Love those neighbors. Maybe you feel like your neighbors are awful to you. Even more reason to love them. Maybe like I said, maybe you're at Hanscom for 6 months and you're like, it's all going to change. What's the point? Like, keep loving your neighbors as yourself. You're not where you are because your house had the right number of bedrooms, the right number of parking spaces, the right number of bathrooms, a good resale value. God strategically placed you there to love your neighbors as yourself, and God has put you in the town where you live, surrounding Burlington today, whatever town you live in, God has strategically placed you there. He's placed you in a part of America. There is less inclination towards Christianity in our neighborhoods than anywhere else in this country. That's a proven fact. There are less people that are inclined towards Christianity than in the greater Boston, New England area than anywhere in this country. God has placed us there. Imagine what it would be like if we decided, I'm going to start loving my neighbor, and I'm going to allow that to start right from my house and out. Rather than love my metaphorical neighbors that could be anywhere, I'm going to start loving the people who God has put closest to me. God's placed you here to be a great loving neighbor, and I want to challenge you, when you pull the drapes open tomorrow, or when you stand up and you look out your window, to look at those houses with fresh eyes. To look at those homes and the people that live in those homes and the people who you're kind of careful about when you reverse out in the mornings, that it isn't just a wave that never gets further than a wave, but it is actually a step into greater relationship over a period of time. Now, I want to give you 3 actual practical steps. Okay, 3 things that this spring and this summer is going to give you some like clear handles to hang on to. 3 absolutes. If you've got an Anthem program, there's this little thing that says notes here. If you want to write these things down, because you're like, if I don't write these things down, I'll forget them and then I'll never do them. I want to give you 3 things. As the band comes up to lead us in a closing song in a little while, I want to give you these 3 simple steps. Okay, step number one is learn their names. Okay, use that card. Learn the names of the 8 homes closest to you, and make it a commitment that you're like, you know what, this spring is going to be the time where, despite the fact that we've lived on this street for years and we've never done anything along these lines at all, this spring is going to be the time when I'm going to learn the names of the people around me. Let me give you a personal story. It's very linked to Anthem and our neighborhood as well. 4 or 5 weeks ago, I met a young man standing right here. He'd come up to me to say hi at the end of a service, and his name was Noah. And he was in his early 20s, and he says, yeah, I graduated Bedford High School, and I said, oh, I live on Temple Terrace in Bedford. And he says, oh, my best friend lives at number such and such or whatever. And I didn't know that neighbor. I didn't know where they were. Didn't know where that house was or anything like that. And he said, oh, I really want to bring him to Anthem one day. And I'm like, oh, that's great, cool. And he lives on the West Coast now. He just visits back and forth time to time. And Liz and I were out walking just 2 or 3 days ago, and we stopped and talked to a neighbor that we'd never talked to before. They had bees and dogs and all kinds of fun things that are just conversation points. So we started chatting, discovered that he's from Europe, so we kind of got to know a bit of connection there. And then I just said to him, you don't know a young man called Noah, do you? And he's like, yeah, he's my son's best friend. He's like, he calls his son over and we say hey. And all of a sudden, this increased community is starting. And guess what? That family's on my list, just to get to know, just to befriend, just to love my neighbor as myself. Because I felt like, well, there was a little moment that maybe God was dropping a connection into my life. The first thing to do is to learn their names. Learn the names of your neighbors. Here's another one we can do, and this is kind of something that you wouldn't expect would be helpful, but I really believe it is. Ask a favor. At some point in the next few weeks or few months, when you could call someone from church to help you. Oh, I need to move this mattress. When you could call a friend who lives 2 miles away. When you could bypass your neighbors, ask a favor. Because when we ask a favor, we let our neighbors know sometimes I have needs. And sometimes I would love it if my neighborhood was the best place to develop the kinds of friendships where we can support and encourage and love our neighbors. We did this a few weeks ago, didn't we? Like we lost the cat, and the cat disappeared. And Liz is better at this whole thing than me anyway. But like the cat like disappeared for 3 days. So Liz was like going around asking neighbors that we'd never met before. And one particular older lady that was a widow living on her own, we discovered is just living just a few houses down from us. She was really concerned about the cat, doing her best to help us try to find it and to like check in with us and make sure we're okay. And all of a sudden, asking a favor, asking for help in a situation where we didn't have to do that, we didn't have to ask those specific people, puts you in a place where you're like, I need you. And I mean, you don't have to buy a cat, set it free, or anything like that. Don't take this to extremes. But if there's a way that you can ask next time, you need to put a ladder up against the side of your home, or you need help with a window, or you need to borrow a screwdriver or a pound of sugar or something like that, I don't know why you need a pound of sugar. That's a lot of sugar. But like maybe rather than going to Stop and Shop, maybe you can ask a neighbor and increase that sense of neighborhoodness in your neighborhood, neighborliness in your neighborhood. And we can learn their names. We can ask a favor. And this next one, this is a bigger goal for like the entire summer. And I'm not saying you do this week. If you feel like I'm at like step one, I don't even know anyone's names on this piece of paper here. Share a meal. Can you imagine sharing a meal with somebody in your neighborhood? And for some of us, it's like, we've never done that before. It's the furthest thing from our minds, because we've got these lotted pieces of land, and we close ourselves off from those who God has placed around us, where God has placed us and where God has placed around us. And I get that there's some that you might actually have to think creatively about this, because maybe you're a single person, and maybe there's some wisdom in who you invite to your apartment or something. And so just broaden this out to specific communities where you have the opportunity to be a neighbor. But I believe that these things might be just the start of asking the Lord, okay, Lord, how can I leave a mark? How can I leave a mark of the kingdom of God in the place where you've put us? Let's stand for closing prayer. I'm going to hold this out, and as I do, if you want to just think in your own mind about those people who are around you, and ask the Lord, what is it that you're asking me to do? What step are you asking me to take next? Lord Jesus, I pray that today we'll all be willing to take steps, whether it's to learn names, whether it's to ask a favor, whether it's to share a meal, whatever it might be, to develop a friendship in my neighborhood that could fulfill, over time, could fulfill the Great Commission. And Lord, I pray that you'll give us the courage and the enthusiasm and strength it takes to take steps that may be uncomfortable, but allow us to fulfill the Great Commandment as best as we can. Lord, as we close with worship today and just kind of surrender our hearts to you, Lord, I pray that you'll receive our worship, receive our praise from this time together this morning.